Hello, Health Science 3052. This is Professor Van Dyke, and this is a presentation for the week of September 14th. This is week 4. So we're talking about population and its impact on the ecosystem, but we'll definitely be touching on a lot of different things here. So we'll see if we have to stretch this into 2 videos or if we can do this all in one. But I want to talk about population and the food supply primarily. We're going to definitely cover a lot of different things. Starting off on slide 1, we're talking about factors that can affect food demand. First being population growth. So as you remember, we're on a current J curve of population growth. Which is fairly substantial, that we're having exponential growth, pretty much doubling quicker and quicker. But we also have rising personal income. It may not feel like it right now, but certainly here in the United States, we have a lot of disposable income, and the more money we have, the less selective we become with how we buy food at the grocery store, and we end up throwing a lot of things away. And then there's food abundance, which is a question mark next to it because, I want to think about this. With regard to food abundance, we certainly do have a lot of food here in the United States, but how does that affect the rest of the world? So as the United States consumes more and more of the global food supply, what does that do with the remainder of the world? Because as you remember with food, so we essentially have the human growth population at a J-curve rate where the ability for us to produce food remains arithmetic, more additive. So as opposed to multiplication, exponential growth, we're seeing a much slower rate at which we can actually produce food. So some of the causes of hunger, we certainly have uneven food distribution, which goes back to food abundance. A lot of food is being utilized here in the United States where it does cost more. Certainly if you can sell a watermelon in Japan for $20, it makes a lot more sense to try to tap into that market than it does to sell it in a third world country. And then certainly poverty. Poverty is one of the leading causes of hunger and inability to attain food because of the fact that wealth is unequally distributed in the world. Moving on to slide 2, health impacts of hunger. So malnutrition is the #1 problem in third world countries. Chronic malnutrition is devastating for youth, small children. So you remember the population statistics that show how challenging it is to live past your 5th birthday in third world countries. And certainly malnutrition is going to have an impact that will last for an individual's life. That'll affect their body and affect their brain, and we're going to talk about some of those deficiencies coming up here shortly. So some of the nutritional deficiencies we'll talk about is kwashiorkor, marasmus, xerophthalmia, anemia, goiters, beriberi, scurvy, pellagra, and rickets. So we'll go ahead and jump into those. Slide 3 is in regard to kwashiorkor, which is a protein deficiency. So the first 2 are going to be protein deficiencies, and this is the largest contributor to high infant mortality in tropical third world countries, most specifically Africa. Develops in babies that are weaned early and fed on starchy foods, which are things like rice and bananas. And I know we tend to think of giving food aid to countries. We send them huge bags of rice, but unfortunately they are just do not have protein to them, as you know, with rice. So this is problematic if this is really all that third world countries are getting in regard to subsistence from first world countries. So kwashiorkor, we'll definitely go into this in fair detail. It's going to cause discoloration of the skin, small stature, retardation of physical growth, loss of appetite, ironically, along with digestive problems, and the fluid is going to build up in the legs and feet, muscular waste, and liver enlargement, which causes the distended belly, and certainly high mortality is caused by kwashiorkor. Onto slide 4. So a lot of people ask, kwashiorkor versus marasmus. Kwashiorkor and marasmus are both protein deficiencies, but one of the big differences is how the individual is going to look. And with kwashiorkor, the belly becomes quite distended and large. And certainly no indication of the fact that these individuals are starving to death It's not, their bellies are not full from food. So certainly something that is very important is in regard to what's actually taking place in these individuals. So how does the distended belly occur? This is primarily going to be through enlarged liver. There's damage to the cells, and it substantially increases in size. Now, because the liver is not functioning properly, you're going to get a lot of buildup of waste fluids. The loss of muscle is going to lead to weak abdominal muscles, and then the weakened lymphatic system can't keep up with the body's waste fluids, and that's going to cause a buildup of waste fluids, certainly in the abdominal cavity and in the spaces that are, going to start filling up with fluid, especially around that weak abdominal wall and the enlarged liver. Lack of protein is going to cause an osmotic imbalance, and again is going to continue to add to this process upon which the body is going to develop that large distended belly. So on to slide 5. This is an image. On the right you see a normal child, or excuse me, on the left you see the normal child, and on the right you see Kwashiorkor with the belly. And then on the far left slide portion, you'll see some of the symptoms, which are going to be diarrhea, that large distended belly, edema, rash, loss of muscle mass, and changes in the texture and color of the hair as well on slide 5. And this is essentially Kwashiorkor. So moving on to slide 6, which is marasmus. This is also a protein deficiency. But again, the big difference is that this is going to present in wasting away. It's not going to have the distended belly. So this is the second protein deficiency we're going to talk about, and affects babies under 1 year of age, especially those that are not breastfed. And they begin to waste away, and the skin hangs very loose and wrinkly around the eyes, legs, waist, and the eyes are going to be very bright and large because of the sinking in of this process, the skin and the muscle mass as well. So on slide 7, you're going to see a side-by-side comparison of marasmus versus Kwashiorkor, and as you can see, there's a vast difference between these two individuals, but essentially they're dying from the same thing, which is protein deficiency. Marasmus, you see that the body is just wasting away. With Kwashiorkor, you see it filling up with waste fluid. That's going to be fatal for both of these individuals. Slide 8, foods that are rich in protein. And I do this at the end of each of these diseases, so we're going to go over these fairly quickly, but foods that have protein are certainly eggs and almonds that grow very plentifully here in California, but not so much in other places. But pistachios, cashews, and peanuts, certainly chicken breast and fish, meats, tuna, turkey, lots of things here that are going to have high protein. But you'll notice with most of these lists, you're going to see broccoli on them. Broccoli is like the superfood. It appears on most of these lists as a solid food source for having an effect, a positive effect in regard to nutrient deficiencies. Moving on to slide 9, xerophthalmia, which is a vitamin A deficiency, results in the drying of the eye membrane and softening of the cornea, leading to night blindness. If it's untreated, it's going to lead to total blindness altogether. And this is a vitamin A deficiency that can have other negative effects on the immune system, respiratory, gastrointestinal, and urinary tract. So xerophthalmia is a real problem. And if you move on to slide 10, you'll see this individual has xerophthalmia, totally blind in their left eye. This is a real problem because we think about children as a source of social security, that they're able to work with us and alongside us and generate wealth and resources. But this individual here, because they're now blind in their left eye, is now more of a negative component in regard to a community, because now they require care as opposed to being able to provide care. They can't work, so now they are going to require that someone works to take care of them. And in a third world country, this is extremely dangerous. This is a real problem, and certainly when you're dealing with regular environmental threats, not being able to see is a real challenge. So xerophthalmia is a vitamin A deficiency. On to slide 11. Foods that have vitamin A, beef liver, blech, nobody likes that. Carrots, sweet potatoes, kale, spinach, broccoli, again, and then butter and eggs that are rich in vitamin A as well. So from top to bottom, you're going from like the highest to the lowest on all of these. Moving on to slide 12, anemia and goiters. We're going to hit 2 for 1 here. Anemia is caused by iron deficiency, and goiters are caused by iodine deficiency. So with anemia, you're going to be sluggish, you're going to have low productivity, low energy. With goiters, you're going to have a swelling around the neck, and we'll show you images of those here coming up. Here's anemia. Obviously, a little bit of malto meal goes a long way, and certainly when you think about kwashiorkor and marasmus, anemia is one of those things that's like, okay, not so bad, you're just kind of sluggish from not getting enough iron, but it can have problems, additional problems as well, because you're not able to produce red blood cells the way you need to. So anemia can be problematic, but you see the foods there in the middle. Before and after image. This is anemia. Really is something that we do see. If we see a protein, or if we see a vitamin or mineral deficiency in the United States, it tends to be things like anemia. So certainly a little bit of oatmeal goes a long ways here. On to slide 14, this is a goiter, a real problem. You see these in third world countries. This young lady here presents with the classic symptoms of goiter, which is the swelling around the neck. And this is going to be pronounced over time as they have an iodine deficiency that continues on. That can be a real problem, but certainly something that when we think about how this is going to affect this individual throughout their life, it is going to be a real problem for them. So hopefully, they get some iodine down there, but obviously it can be a real challenge. But we do still see goiters. If you go online, you can do some searches, internet searches for images of goiters, and you can see that this has been a part of history for some time that is fairly painful and has a horrible image associated with it. Now, foods that are high in iron and iodine, we got the two lists side by side on slide 15. Iron, obviously, dark chocolate and spinach and lentils, broccoli again, beans, fish, eggs, liver, and beef. And then food that's high in iodine, we get plenty of iodine here in the United States, primarily because that bottom image, you'll see the Morton Salt Company began to infuse iodine into the salt, and that had a really dramatic effect on the number of goiters here in the United States and in countries that actually purchase and utilize iodine-enriched salts. So we tend not to see that so much anymore because we get plenty of salt in our diet, and that's slide 15. On to slide 16, we have other food deficiencies. So scurvy is caused by shortness, a lack of vitamin C, which is going to be fairly substantially pronounced in the gums. We also have beriberi, which is a disease caused by vitamin B1 deficiency, pellagra, which is caused by niacin deficiency, and rickets, which is caused by vitamin D. So we'll move through these kind of one at a time. Again, slide 17, scurvy, which is a vitamin C deficiency. You'll see swelling and bleeding of the gums. These people are often very sick, easily bruise and bleed. They have poor wound healing, swelling of the joints, and they actually will have, they can have corkscrew bleeding around the hair follicles, which is just disgusting. So this vitamin C deficiency, you may have heard this saying when you talk about a limey. This is an English saying. And this was actually came from the days where you would spend a great deal of time at sea if you were a sailor. The English sailors would stock limes because they were easy to store and they were high in vitamin C, so they would take them with them, and that's why they are, occasionally called limeys still today. Now, vitamin C is the reason that you probably all love Jack Sparrow and the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and trust in this. If Jack Sparrow was real, he would have horrible gums, he would have scurvy almost certainly, and he would really not quite look like the beautiful toothed individual that we see before us in the movie theaters. So vitamin C is a real problem, especially for people that lacked access to citrus fruits. On to slide 18, foods that are rich in vitamin C. Obviously citrus reads top top and first and foremost, strawberries, pineapples, mangoes, kiwis, papayas, and there's broccoli again that's high in vitamin C. So those cruciferous vegetables really are a real benefit. On to slide 19, which is berry. This is a vitamin B1 deficiency. So you can see a number of different things that can be affected by this. There's dry berry, which is going to affect the nervous system. Wet berry, which is going to affect the cardiovascular. Infantile berry found in babies with a B1 deficiency, and then cerebral berry, which is caused by alcoholism. And you can look at the essentially the components of the images on the left-hand side. You're going to see dyspepnia, the Werich syndrome, where the heart is going to be abnormally sized, edema. There's going to be wrist drop and extraordinary weakness in these individuals. Moving on to slide 20, these are foods that are rich in vitamin B1. You have beef and oatmeal, peas, asparagus, sunflower seeds, orange, crimini mushrooms, things like that. Slide 21. So this is pellagra, and this is caused by a niacin deficiency. And obviously, you know, if you eat Wonder Bread, you know that Wonder Bread is extremely high in niacin because we have introduced niacin to those foods. But you can see what it does to an individual. Extraordinary volatility with regard to the hands and skin and the face as well. And this comes from simple niacin deficiency, which you do not see here in the United States. It's extremely rare. Slide 22, foods that are rich in niacin are turkey and chicken breast, liver, tuna, peanuts, mushrooms, and green peas, things like that. On to slide 23, this is rickets. Rickets is the reason that a lot of sailors had pronounced bow-leggedness, primarily because their bones couldn't support the weight of their bodies, and they would begin to bow out like you see on the slides, slide 23. And this is from a vitamin D deficiency, which again is something that we rarely see in the United States, but you do see it in third world countries still today. And that's slide 23. Slide 24 is foods that are rich in vitamin D, which is eggs, cheese, yogurt, milk, salmon, and liver, things like that. On to slide 25. With regard to reducing world hunger, we do have some options at our disposal, but they can be fairly challenging. So again, there's 5 options here that can be tough. So expanding land cultivation, increasing fish supply, reducing pre- and post-harvest losses, eating lower on the food chain, and improving crop yield. So we'll go ahead and move on to slide 26, where we'll talk about these kind of one at a time. Expanding land cultivation is a real challenge because the majority of usable land that can be cultivated is being cultivated. So, you know, what are our options? We can make more land, and certainly I bet a lot of you have probably seen vertical farming that is occurring in like office buildings and things like that now. So we're building up so that we can increase land cultivation, but that can be challenging because now all of a sudden you're dealing with the loss of natural light and trying to work with fluorescent bulbs or sodium pressure bulbs and things like that. So expanding land cultivation can be fairly challenging. Now, this is one of those areas that we think about, oh, this is such a great idea, until you realize that some of the most of the land that's being explored for cultivation is the rainforests. We're chopping them down at an alarming rate, but it turns out that the soil in rainforests actually isn't that great. Most of the nutrients come from the detritus that is being broken down into the soil. So if you remove that vegetation, now all of a sudden you're left with areas that really aren't all that great for land cultivation. But certainly if you're starving, these are the tough choices that you have to make. On to slide 27, increasing the fish supply. So we're doing a great job of overfishing the oceans. We're very good at fishing. We've developed a lot of means upon which we've found great success, but at the same time, it's really cutting into the fish that are remaining in the ocean. Now, obviously, there's still a lot of fish, but certainly with environmental pressure, this will continue to be more challenging. You can actually read articles on the bluefin tuna that's being affected because they used to have offspring at a much slower rate, and now they're required to reproduce much more quickly. But one of the ways that we've increased our fish supply is by using fish farms. We can actually set up nets in the ocean, and the problem comes in when a storm comes along and knocks the barriers down, and all of a sudden you have a massive release of fish into the ocean. That can be problematic as well. Moving on to slide 28, some more prospects that we have is reducing pre and post harvest loss. We lose a lot of our harvest due to pests and diseases and storage conditions. If there's too much or too little moisture, you can have problems. And certainly there are a lot of insects that like to get into these rich food banks and destroy the crops. We also have diseases as well, like Aspergillus flavus, that can get into grains and create problems as well. And then eating lower on the food chain, eating more plant than animal food. So obviously if you're eating lower on the food chain, you don't have to grow the plant to feed to the consumer the meat, that we would end up eating, and you cut out that middle step. So you just grow the plants and then you eat them. Now, can anyone tell me, and this is obviously rhetorical, but why is it that if you're eating lower on the food chain and you're eating things like Beyond Meat, why does it cost more than actual meat? And the answer is pretty straightforward, and I'm sure you can all figure it out. But what a hassle that is, and we sincerely hope that that turns around. And then you also have improving yield per acre. This is one of those things that a lot of people don't like to talk about, but genetic modification has allowed us to increase our yield per acre. So when the Pilgrims first came over, an ear of corn was about the size of my hand, where an ear of corn today is more like from my elbow to the middle part of my hand. It's more than doubled in size. Now, while we don't like to talk about genetically modified organisms, we certainly have gained a great deal of benefit from GMOs. And I certainly encourage your thoughts on this. If you have a stance one side or another, consider writing your paper about this, because it is one of the great debates of our generation, is that genetically modified organisms, are they good or are they bad? They may have an effect on the environment, they may have an effect on the bee population, maybe, but the reality of it is they provide us with a substantially larger amount of food, which is going to relate directly to the yield per acre that we're actually seeing in any given place. On to slide 29, problems and solutions. Some of the problems we have is that the global population, as you remember, is continuing on a J curve of growth, which is substantial. Growth per capita food supply has leveled off. So again, we're not making enough food to keep up with the demand as the population grows. Shrinking cropland from a number of different things, and certainly climate change is having an effect on how much shoreline we have. We're losing some islands here and there. So definitely a decrease in the shrinking cropland. Falling water tables, which can be seen across California and across the world. Diminishing impact of fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers. This is slide 29, by the way. Our synthetic fertilizers don't work as well as they used to, so they're not giving us the bang that we would hope from them. And then a long-term adverse climate change. So yes, in fact, you can see climate change having an effect on our ability to grow, as there are changes with the weather systems that can increase or decrease rain, increase periods of freeze, things like that. So some solutions that we have can be challenging and certainly very tough to enforce, as we talked about before. Stabilizing the population, that's a hard one, because as we had mentioned with third world countries, trying to implement something along those lines is very challenging, and it's a challenge here in first world countries as well. And then reversing land degradation, which can be tough. We seem to be going in the opposite direction, where we are degrading the land more and more as time goes by, and that's slide 29. Slide 30, population bomb fallout. So what's happening with the population continuing to grow and having an impact on the environment in general. We're seeing unemployment is increasing. That's really frightening during this coronavirus pandemic. We're watching a lot of people lose their jobs. So, how do you afford food? What do you eat? What do you do? And then literacy is falling. Illiteracy has actually fallen off quite a bit. More people can read today than could in the 40s, 50s, and whatnot. But again, as population grows and there become problems with environmental impact, you will actually see literacy start to fall off. Housing is a serious problem. Chances are most of us will be renting for the majority of our lives. And certainly this can be a real challenge trying to manage housing. Poverty will continue to climb as the population grows, and political unrest will be certainly a marker of those times. And this can be a real challenge to try to deal with these things. On to slide 31. The growth impact on the ecosystem. So we certainly have a lot of overgrazing that's taking place, soil erosion and deforestation. With overgrazing, we have so many animals that are grazing, like cattle, goats, sheep, etc. And they really do a fantastic job of cleaning any of the plants, those surface plants. And what that'll do is that'll increase dust, particulate matter, and erosion when you lose the topsoil, which is number 2. This is slide 31. And then deforestation. So deforestation is a real problem because as you begin to cut these trees down to make room for crops, you can lose a lot of the value from these trees. So trees will actually form what's called a carbon sink as they're pulling in carbon dioxide from the air. They're storing that in around the root system for future use. And these carbon sinks are basically scrubbing the environment of CO2, which is a real benefit. But in addition to that, they're also slowing the wind process that will increase soil erosion and whatnot as well. On to slide 32, some causes of deforestation. And I want to say this is a test question. Land clearing for agriculture, so we're clearing off more land and planting more crops. We're gathering wood for fuel purposes. Certainly commercial lumbering, as you'd seen previously, we have less homes, and we're gathering up more lumber for commercial uses. But cattle grazing is a huge part of this deforestation process where we need grasslands, so we'll clear sections of the rainforest to try to feed these grazing animals. Slide 33. This is an image of before and after. You can see the tree in the middle there. It's just mocking you, right? But essentially, you have a place that is, on the left side, a rich environment with biodiversity, and on the right side you have land that is just denuded of life. But yes, you can plant crops here now, but you're going to have an increase in pesticide uses and soil erosion and whatnot. It's going to be a real challenge. That's slide 33. Slide 34, impacts of the ecosystem continued. So as you continue to cut down trees and climate change occurs, you'll start to see desertification, which is making desert-like conditions out of once productive land. And this is certainly something that you can see if you look at like the NASA images from 20 years ago versus the NASA images today. We have a lot more deserts that are actually occurring. Number 5 on slide 34 is loss of wetlands, such as swamps and bogs and marshes and whatnot. So we do see a loss of these wetlands as we continue to clear land and drain them for agricultural use. And then number 6 is loss of biodiversity, which is certainly happening. We have a lot of loss of biodiversity associated with human action, which is accelerating the rate of species extinction. So we're losing a lot of species associated with that, and loss of biodiversity. We just never know when we're going to take down one of those apex species and end up pulling the block out of the Jenga tower. So this could be a real problem in the future. On to slide 35. Endangered species, they're managed essentially by the Endangered Species Act. the ESA. But we did have a convention. Don't get hung up on the convention so much because it really isn't that big of a deal. They basically said we have a lot of things going on. We're introducing exotic species. We're having all these toxic substances and habitats are being destroyed. So we began to focus on endangered species with this convention on international trade in endangered species in flora and fauna. Now, here currently, we have a lot of invasive species that are problematic, and they're making more endangered species as time goes by. So you probably heard of Arundodonax, which is called creek cancer, which is like a bamboo. It grows all along our waterways in Southern California. It's choking out a lot of vegetation that naturally occurs. But you've also probably heard of the cowbird, which is a brood parasite. So it comes in and lays its eggs in another bird's nest after it boots their egg out, and then the parent birds will return, and they will actually sit on that egg and raise it as their own, having lost their own egg. So this is a quick way to lose like the things like the California songbirds and things like that. On to slide 36. This is the Love Canal. Just a tragic story. You can read about it if you want by going to Wikipedia or anywhere else. That's slide 36. Slide 37 gives a little bit of information on the Love Canal, which is near Niagara Falls. Some of the problems that they had with the Hooker Chemical Company that dumped massive amounts of chemicals and basically turned portions of the Niagara city area into a Superfund site, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as the semester goes on, excuse me. On to slide 38. With regard to protecting biodiversity, now I think this is actually the test question. In 1973, we had the Endangered Species Act, the ESA, which protects native animals, plants, especially those that are declared by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife as endangered. So who declares when something is an endangered species? It's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, okay? It's not CITES. It's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife that is going to declare something an endangered species. And we definitely want to do everything we can to protect those. So we're going to use habitat conservation, trying to keep a balance, and definitely doing everything we can to protect habitats for these endangered species. On to slide 39. This is my own personal favorite. This is an endangered species called the Ord's kangaroo rat. Go online and you'll see that kangaroo rats are absolutely adorable, and certainly by losing them we lose so much more than just this humorous, adorable creature. And this is something that we're consistently fighting against all the time. So we do have kangaroo rats in Riverside County that are not endangered, but again, the Ord's kangaroo rat is extremely extremely endangered, and something that I would just hate the thought of losing one of these little adorable creatures. But certainly, I talk a lot about the balance between the environment and the economy. If you were taking this class live with me, I would be giving a lot more of a lecture in regard to the fact that it's a challenge to balance environmental concerns with economic concerns, and that's always the struggle that we face. Okay, so make sure and keep that in mind. Now, this is going to be the only presentation that you're going to have for this week, because I want you to start looking into your topics. Make sure you start trying to figure out what you want to write your paper and do your presentation on, because those dates are rapidly approaching. Now, if you, as you know, you have to write on a peer-reviewed journal article. You can just use one, but make sure it's a peer-reviewed journal article. If you have questions about that, that's why we have the due date that says turn in your topic by this date, okay? That's designed to get you to figure out what you want to write on. But if you are comfortable that your article is a peer-reviewed journal article and you're perfectly fine with that, you don't need to turn it in to me. You can go ahead and start writing your paper and doing your presentation at any time. Now, in regard to the presentation, as I had mentioned before, make sure and be creative. Do what you want to do. You can do a PowerPoint with a voiceover. You can do a video directly off your cell phone like I'm doing here. Whatever is easiest and most conducive to what you want to do, what you want to accomplish. So keep that in mind. With that, I hope you have a great week. keep your questions coming to me, and I look forward to communicating with you primarily over email. Send me email at william.vandyke@csusb.edu. And with that, thank you so much, and keep the questions coming. Bye.